Dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths lived there at the same time as humans. Thousands of footprints were discovered on the ancient lake bed. The reason most of them were made by children and teenagers is that, like they are today, kids during the Ice Age were playful and full of energy. They jumped into puddles, skipped and sloshed in the mud. That's why they left behind more fossilized imprints in the sand than the adults. Some researchers believe it was the job of the young to fetch and carry, while adults did other tasks by the edge of the lake. One path of footprints goes on for almost a mile. Judging by their size and depth, they seem to be those of a woman or a teenager. Each track tells a story. Sometimes the footsteps of a toddler show up beside the bigger ones and then they disappear. Maybe the path was made by a mother and child. The footprints got deeper and broader as she picked up and carried the toddler on one side or the other. Sometimes she slipped on the mud because of the extra weight she was carrying. Other times she had to stretch to avoid a puddle. She walked very fast, perhaps to avoid dangerous animals in the area. On the way back, the woman followed the same path in reverse, but this time without the child. Other fossilized footprints show that 2 big animals crossed her tracks at some point between the 2 trips. One of them was a giant sloth. It stood up on its hind legs to sniff around for danger before crossing the path. Another was a mammoth. It walked across her tracks in a straight line without stopping to check for humans. The ghost tracks tell us the story of a day in the life of a mother and child during what scholars call the indigenous Paleolithic era. To fully understand the history of this part of the world, we have to uncover and follow other tracks, including more recent ones. They might take us to places we didn't even know existed. Grass seeds and debunked old theories. Sometimes the tiniest clue will completely change what we thought we knew about the past. In 2019, one researcher found tiny seeds of ditch grass above and below the white sand's footprints. Each is almost as small as a single sesame seed. Scientists used radiocarbon dating to find out how old the grass seeds were. They found out that the newest ones were 21,000 years old, and the oldest were 23,000 years old. That means people visited or lived near the lake for at least 2,000 years during the Ice Age. Those little grass seeds totally debunked what we thought we knew about how and when the first native people came to the Americas. For a long time, archaeologists believed that the first peoples arrived in the Western Hemisphere no more than 12,000 years ago. They were called Clovis people because the stone tools they used were found at an archaeological site near Clovis, New Mexico. Archaeologists claimed the Clovis people arrived from Siberia by crossing a land connection called Beringia. Where the Bering Strait is now between Siberia and Alaska, the sea had receded for a few hundred years, leaving a dry crossing. This happened at the end of the Ice Age. They thought it wasn't possible for people and animals to cross before this, but the human footprints at White Sands have shot down these old theories. Many native people never accepted the Clovis first argument. Native oral traditions explain that the first peoples have lived and migrated in the Americas, or Turtle Island, since time immemorial. Turtle Island is the name used by some indigenous people for the lands now known as North and Central America. In the past, white archaeologists had dismissed indigenous knowledge as unscientific, but native expert Paulette Steeves argues that white archaeologists themselves were not always very scientific. For more than 100 years, they refused to consider solid evidence that humans had been on the continent much longer than 12,000 years. Sometimes they suppressed that evidence. In her book, The Indigenous Paleolithic of the Western Hemisphere, Steeves writes that the first peoples were probably here between 60,000 and 100,000 years ago. Archaeology books written from the point of view of white settlers have made it seem like North America was empty land without people or history. They claimed native people on the continent were recent migrants. Other theories claimed prehistoric native groups in the Southwest disappeared mysteriously. They didn't leave any trace behind. This is another way of erasing today's native people's ancestral roots. Thankfully, native scholars today are showing that these theories are not true. Most history books written in the past claimed that Mexican Americans were for the most part recent immigrants to the Southwest. That's not correct. The native ancestors of Mexico